DemocracyOS is an open source application for online decision making. Santiago Siri is the president of DemocracyOS. Santiago, welcome to Software Engineering Daily.
Thank you very much for having me, Jeff.
Your co-founder, Pia, described our system as one where, quote, a few people make daily decisions for the many, and the many get to vote once every couple of years. And 500 years ago, this was an appropriate setup. Why is it inappropriate today?
Well, I think that there's definitely a crisis of representation if you look at the rise of manifestations that we have seen in most of modern democracies today, even in the US, with the Occupy movement on one side and the Tea Party on the other. And I think that this representation crisis leads to polarization, leads to society perceiving that the political class is not really representing their interests. And I think that certainly has to do with the fact that pretty much everything has changed around our life, and the way we connect with each other, the way we communicate, the way we work, even the way we fall in love, except the way we govern ourselves as a society. And I think that certainly the political system is one of the most conservative systems out there, and it needs an upgrade if we look into the challenges of the 21st century.
So with that introduction, what is DemocracyOS?
DemocracyOS is an open source free software for democratic decision making. It's a very simple tool where you can get informed about the issues being debated in Congress, debate with other citizens in a platform that rewards the best arguments, and vote how you would like your representative to vote in Congress or in any other institution.
So I'm a voter. I download DemocracyOS. How do I use it?
So it's an open source software. So a lot of organizations set up their own server running a DemocracyOS instance, and you set up a web page where any user can access to your DemocracyOS instance. And from there, you can run the democratic participation process entirely online using the software from your own infrastructure.
What type of organization would be using this?
So we've been working with political parties, federal governments, local governments, groups of activists, non-profit organizations. Any kind of institution that has multiple stakeholders that need to make a decision can benefit from a tool like this. And obviously we are trying to understand and researching on how the technological participation can synchronize with the institutional processes of these organizations.
So what kinds of decisions have you seen people making on this platform?
Oh, we have seen a lot of very interesting cases. For example, the Congress of Buenos Aires implemented DemocracyOS. They piloted 16 bills on the platform officially, with the commitment of whatever the bill got most votes will be treated in the floor of the Congress. And to our surprise, for example, we saw that a bill that came from a minoritarian party, a party that only holds one seat in Congress, was actually the one that was most voted because it was about taking care of nurses in public hospitals, reducing the working hours of nurses from 12 hours a day to 6 hours a day in public hospitals. That was a bill that has been dormant for 10 years, and we saw suddenly that bill getting a lot of traction online because the political party involved with it in defending the interests of nurses really took action in the platform and beat even all the other bigger parties that were in power. That's an example of many uses. We've seen it in Tunisia. It was used to debate the national constitution. A political party like Podemos in Spain used it internally to define their internal party policy. And we learn from these use cases and try to understand what's valuable to these organizations.
When users vote on DemocracyOS, how is that binding from the point of view of the elected officials who actually have to carry forth the higher level interpretation of that user's vote? Why do the people have to vote, or why do the senators or the higher level governing organizations have to vote?
That's a great question, and that's actually the main challenge of a technology like this. What we did when we began the development of DemocracyOS 3 years ago is that we also created our own political party. It's called the Net Party in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And the idea of this political party is to have candidates that are committed to always vote in Congress according to what citizens decide in DemocracyOS. We cannot force the politician to vote according to the platform, but we can, coming from a political party designed to use these kind of technologies, we can actually tie the entire political capital of the politician to that promise. And that was one way we figured that was feasible to guarantee or to provide a certain level of guarantee that whatever you end up voting, the tool has an institutional impact and it's not just a survey online. That said, now we are looking into new challenges regarding how we can use DemocracyOS with digital institutions of all kinds using the blockchain, and figure out even a lot of the aspects that have to do with not just voting, but also guaranteeing that whatever you end up voting online has an institutional impact. And if institutions are run in an entirely purely digital way, I think that democracies can be more compatible with that than with traditional institutions.
So I definitely want to get into more of the net party, and I want to get into the blockchain stuff. But first, a more naive question. How do you verify identities on this platform? Because, traditional voting, you get one person, one vote. But that becomes a lot more difficult when you take things into cyberspace.
Excellent question. That's the key thing. The two things that differentiate an election from a survey is strong identity validation and institutional commitment. And so far, DemocracyOS, as an open source software, lacks those two elements. I think those are the two aspects that we need to work on and develop further on. And identity validation is a very big problem in itself. That's also another interesting element that can be that we can use the blockchain in a very useful way in order to at least provide some credentials that are able to guarantee that you are who you say you are. But that's a very important element. Another aspect of identity validation is so far DemocracyOS, what it does is basically validation through email, which is extremely basic. But as the stakes are higher and you need stronger identity validation and avoid bots and duplicated identities in the platform, what we're trying to work on right now is figuring out protocols of peer-to-peer validation of identities and see how can those be played out, because we want to avoid like a central entity that is the ultimate validator of who gets to vote and who does not get to vote. So
what are the peer-to-peer identity management solutions you're looking at?
Well, we've been talking, for example, with the folks of onename.com. They're a blockchain-based identity startup based in New York. There are a couple of other ones looking into that problem. It's a massive problem, the really guaranteeing online identity. To be honest, we have a lot of open questions right now. I think I'm working actually on a piece of software as we speak regarding specifically that aspect of the technology, and it's an ongoing process. But it's certainly not a trivial thing to sort out. But it's a fundamental one if you want to do online voting the right way.
Have you looked at Keybase?
No, I haven't heard of them. No.
Oh, you should definitely check out Keybase. Keybase is I actually did a show on them. I think it's kind of like a cryptographic key system that uses your different online identities to verify you. So if you just have Facebook, that's one source of identity, but you can also have your GitHub account, your LinkedIn account. You can have some sort of identity on a blockchain system, and the idea is this consensus of your different identities can asymptote towards a reliable sense of identity, which I think is basically like as good as you can get, because even with in-person voting systems, you're going to have some times where people submit fraudulent votes.
Yeah, and it's fraudulent votes are always prone to happen in these kind of platforms. We want to also grow beyond just the traditional concept of direct democracy or direct voting. Another interesting idea that is out there that we're exploring with is this concept of liquid democracy, where you can vote directly on any issue, or you can delegate your vote to a peer based on a certain kind of knowledge. So, say for example, I trust your knowledge on the environmental issues, then I can trust you to vote on my behalf on any topic that is tagged as environmental issues. So we're exploring those mechanisms of decision making, and in order to provide more interesting ways for the collectives to think out solutions to problems.
Okay, so let's talk more about the blockchain. How does Democracy OS use the blockchain?
So far, it does not use the blockchain.
Oh, okay.
So the software is, I think it's still in its very early stages, and I think that there's certainly a lot of potential in using the blockchain, in the sense that I think that what the blockchain enables at the end of the day is the ability to create institutions that run purely on digital code by securing the transactions on this decentralized ledger, and our concern or interest with the blockchain is to see if we can provide a toolkit to enable anyone to set up an institution on top of it, and provide the proper tools to let anyone do the governance of that institution using a technology like DemocracyOS. What we care about particularly with the blockchain is providing a governance for any kind of organization or institution running on top of the blockchain. And we have to figure out that. And that's, I think, it's a big road that we can end up taking.
Okay, so let me see if I'm getting this right, because as I understood, like I thought blockchain was core to Democracy OS's technology, but I think what you're saying is that these blockchain, these different blockchain networks, Ethereum, Ripple, Bitcoin, other things that are built on the blockchain, they need some sort of voting, and you're saying that Democracy OS has a chance to be the voting platform that sits on top of blockchains.
So,
is that inaccurate?
No, voting by itself, it's not, understanding the vote as a currency, I think is one way of securing that that each vote was properly counted, that it was counted proper, that it wasn't. That each voter needs to be able to verify their own vote at any time. It needs to verify that vote was counted, and it was counted in a proper way, that they have actually voted. And also they need to encrypt it in order to avoid being pressured by someone to show you, to show him how you voted on a certain issue. Those are all the challenges related to the vote token. And an interesting element of the blockchain is that we can use satoshis or small transactions to express those votes and to understand the dynamic of the vote as a currency. That's like the first layer of what we need to do. So once the vote is secure and identity is properly validated, also using similar tokens, I think that the next thing that we need to figure out is, well, any institution that is willing to acknowledge the result or the outcome of an election, then it must provide, after such election, the resources to the person that won the election to take such to execute on such decision. And that's why it's, once you start diving into this problem, you start with voting, you start to understand voting, the voting dynamics, the vote as a currency, but as you go deeper, you understand that it's what we really need to figure out is how institutions are governed, how distributed institutions are governed that are mounted on top of the blockchain. And we're bullish on the blockchain because it basically provides a layer of security, of decentralization, and fundamentally of trust that is core to what makes institutions worthy. At the end of the day, every single institution that is out there is basically an organism that guarantees us trust in order to do transactions of any kind.
So yeah, and speaking of governance around the blockchain, what do you think of the debates that are going on around the blockchain? I actually have kind of stopped paying close attention to the area, but the last time I checked, there was this big debate around whether Bitcoin was going to be forked or not.
Yeah, the famous Bitcoin versus Bitcoin XT. I've been following a little bit of that, and I think it's setting a very interesting precedent of what regulation means in the digital age. You know, I was asked recently in an interview if governments should regulate the internet, and at the end of the day, governments can legislate laws that claim that the law of gravity is no longer a law, but gravity will still happen. and the thing with digital code is that there's no possible law written on ink or paper that can actually have an impact on digital code at the end of the day. It's just a complete different paradigm. Digital code.
Well, they can balkanize the internet, though.
What do you mean by balkanize?
I mean, like North Korea, right? Like North Korea is its own internet.
Oh yeah, balkanize as in the Balkans. Yes, that's that internet of silos, the internet in China, the internet in North Korea, in Russia. That's a big threat. I think nation states are definitely a threat to the internet, even the United States at a certain extent, with the NSA and all of that has been going on and we learned about in the last couple of years, certainly shows that the interests of nation states are not as compatible to the interests of the internet as a state, or the internet as a... the way I see it is that we live in a world that we have an infrastructure basically consisting of corporations and nation states, banks, and other industrial giant types of organizations. And what we're witnessing is an emergent superstructure that is disruptive of that previous infrastructure. And that superstructure is certainly the internet that has changed the way we communicate. But I think that in the next couple of decades, as the blockchain evolves, the internet is going to change the way we build, create, and govern ourselves through digital institutions. The internet of institutions, I think, is something very interesting that we want to pursue.
Let's talk more about the technology stack of DemocracyOS. So you have organizations who can put DemocracyOS on a server somewhere, and a voter can go to a web page that accesses that server. What is the technology stack that DemocracyOS uses? What are these organizations deploying on their servers?
So DemocracyOS is entirely coded in JavaScript. It runs on Node, uses MongoDB. It can be easily deployed in a Heroku instance. So it's pretty... I'd say that for today's standards, it's using pretty well-tested technologies. I think one key reason to work on JavaScript is, first off, because of the sizable open source community currently developing web apps on that computer language, and secondly, it's a computer language that can run pretty much in any kind of Turing machine out there, and that universality of JavaScript, I think it's also an interesting element of how we decided to work on DemocracyOS. But it's pretty simple. It's I'd say that right now the source code has is a bit complicated because it grew after 3 years to become to have too many modules and to become a little bit complex in its maintainability. But the key thing for us has been to try to understand the simplest user experience possible, because the real challenge that we face with this kind of technology is getting people engaged. It's not easy to engage people online, especially for civic purposes, for political issues. People like to complain, but then to get on board on a platform where you can vote is sometimes a bit hard, and we focus on the simplicity of the user experience as as a key feature for the software.
Tell me more about that. How do you whittle down Democracy OS to the core features, the core simplicity that you need it to do?
Well, we certainly started a lot of with complex ideas at the beginning, but we always stuck to this idea of getting informed, debate, and vote. Like the deliberative process of democracy consists of those three elements, and the voting aspect is very straightforward. It's just binary voting, yes, no, or abstention if you want to abstain. Information-wise, is like a blog post. The debate aspect is a simple forum that works in a similar way to Reddit. We didn't reinvent the wheel in any of these features. We kept on a very simple approach to see the bills, get informed, and vote on them. And we haven't moved very far away from that. That led us, I think the main reason for the growth of DemocracyOS has been the fact that it's open source. That is a very compelling aspect for a lot of activists and political organizations around the world, which the new generations already understand the importance of free software and open source technology, especially for civic purposes where you require to be transparent if you want to do it the right way. Our challenges have been, we have our technological challenges, but so far, because we try to get into a very hostile environment such as politics, a lot of our challenges were more cultural, working with countries in Latin America that had very hostile governments, with very difficult social situations, and my sensation is that civic technologies are faster or get more adopted more quickly in these countries, because these countries are the ones where people feel the need or feel the urgency to find an alternative to the status quo. It's the reason why Bitcoin grew in Argentina, or is growing in Venezuela, or it grew in Greece, because there's the urgency for finding an alternative to these super big institutions we call governments.
Yeah, let's talk more about that, because I've heard some of the very interesting applications of Bitcoin in Argentina. How do you see Bitcoin being used in Argentina?
So I know a couple of facts about that. It grew 10 times from last year to this year, the volume of Bitcoin transacted or operated within Argentina, and that's a big deal, 1,000% growth year over year. Argentina has the peculiarity that it's a country that historically has been going from financial crisis to financial crisis. So there's a knack in the general population to not be scared about trying something that is alternative to the official currency. So I think that these are very interesting things that are happening, and we're still early days, because going against the notions of what we were taught and educated about what money is a very
it's almost heretical. It's like, this is like a religious thing. Like if you I don't know if you've ever tried to talk to your parents about, like, hey, so this is this Bitcoin thing, and that money stuff that you believe, like, it's all a lie. Like, that conversation's really hard to have.
It's a hard pill to swallow. But that's why in countries like Argentina, say, for example, the Net Party also, there is starting up a political party is not an individual startup. It's a collective startup, because you don't have funds. You are not doing it for the money. You are doing it because you want to change stuff in society through the political means, and that requires a lot of citizens committed to spend their time and energy and resources on a quixotic quest almost. And the Net Party was able to flourish in a city like Buenos Aires because of the hostile and broken political situation in the country. Same thing with Bitcoin.
And the quixotic nature of the Argentine people.
Well, that's certainly an attribute of Argentines.
Okay, so let's talk more. I mean, speaking of quixotic, like, how do you get, like, people to work on this platform? How do you get the open source community to be excited about this project? There's so many open source projects they could be working on. Give me a sense of the ethos of the open source community on DemocracyOS.
That's a great question. It's not easy to engage the open source community. We have a foundation that actively develops, has a team of 4 full-time developers actively contributing to the repository of GitHub, and the foundation relies on getting grants in order to further pursue the development of the app. But beyond that core team of developers, there's a large community of different organizations, groups, in universities, in different cities, in different places, where each one of these communities has one developer or one hacker friend that is able to set up an instance or put it on a server, and all these guys there contribute on from the minoritarian things like translating the application to their local language, to more complex things like tracking, doing the quality assurance, tracking bugs, or reporting stuff that's reporting different stuff about the application, such as thing ideas, and they get involved in our GitHub repo and in our Gitter channel, where the developers are constantly chatting, figuring out how to sort out the technical hurdles that you might find setting up a DemocracyOS. And it's a collaboration environment. It's not easy. I mean, the open, we've been very lucky with the impact that DemocracyOS had. I think it was the right timing for something like that to happen, and we had over 1,000 pull requests, and it's just great to suddenly discover every week a new instance of DemocracyOS out there being used in a new way.
Yeah, and can you tell me the process from, like, when was DemocracyOS initially written, and when did you open source it, and how long did it take for people to start jumping on and hacking on it?
Excellent. Well, we started in April 2012, and the first thing we got advice, and I think it was a great tip that was given to us by more experienced developers, is that do it open source this stuff as soon as possible. Do not waste until you have a professional code or whatever that means. Just do it right away and don't have any shame about it. And that was actually great advice to do it right from day zero, to put the repo with really nasty, horrible user experience and code and stuff. But I think that what you do at the beginning of a project of this nature is going out there and meeting every single coder friend you have and telling him or her about this project and what you want to do with it, and check it out, download it, and some of those guys will stick around. Some of those guys will eventually want to make this their professional path and see if they can make a living out of it. And if the thing is able to get some growth and to get some traction, you can always work around yourself around finding the right resources to support it. It's not easy, especially coming from a country like Argentina. It's definitely not Silicon Valley, but it has the advantage of being an environment where Latin America in general, I would say, has a lot of political activity, and it's a fertile ground for these kind of initiatives.
So you mentioned that the code was kind of becoming slightly bloated, maybe, or you've got too many excess modules. It sounds like maybe you're going to have to do some major refactoring in the future, or maybe I'm wrong, but assuming you do, how would you institute a major refactor when you're communicating with an open source community? You can't really I imagine it's hard to say, hey, we're going to do project refactor.
Yeah, I agree. I think right now DemocracyOS is being maintained by a foundation in Buenos Aires. They have done a series of refactors in order to provide the tool with a better backbone for scalability and to make it easier for people to jump in and set up a Democracy OS. But it's definitely a hard wall regarding to implement changes in the user experience if you want to go beyond direct democracy. If you explore other models of democracy, you have to drastically change the user experience, the interfaces, and the design of the application. And it's a hard wall regarding if you want to implement blockchain structure or blockchain data structures on the application. So we're in the path right now of democracies will take on as this open source software, but myself and some of the other developers working on these kind of technologies, we are on the path of starting from scratch because we believe that we can take a different path specifically to do a proper solution that evolves this idea of using the blockchain, which is something that we really believe on its potential for this kind of empowering technologies for civic purposes. And the other thing is exploring better interfaces for online decision making that go beyond that just direct democracy. And another challenge is identity. So it's likely that a big refactor, I think it's hard to do with existing code base and with existing community. Of course, it's not easy. And we want to start an alternative path, taking into advantage all of the know-how and experience we had developing and working with Democracy OS.
So that is a lot of challenges, and I'm very curious about how you organize your day or how you strategize or organize your business strategy. I mean, because you've got these different threads. It sounds like the refactor is kind of a pressing need. But at the same time, you want to do this blockchain stuff correctly. So how do you prioritize? I mean, I'm sure as you realized with the simplifying nature that you encountered early on with Democracy OS, oftentimes the best thing to do with a software project is to do less. But it sounds like you have some big things that you need to work on, like at least 3 big things, like refactor the application, implement blockchain stuff, and implement identity stuff. Those are 3 really big problems.
Amazingly big, yeah, and I agree with you. That's why it's not about working on this on your own, but rather encountering the collaboration spaces with different teams that are tapping into the same problem. Because of what we've done with DemocracyOS, we've been very lucky to meet extremely talented developers and teams of developers that are working on these spaces. And my routine is basically trying to synchronize with some of these projects on what they're doing, what they're delivering, and how can that help what we're trying to do with our work building democratic participation technologies, and how at the same time how what we are doing with that can help them in their different projects. I think that within the open source community, and especially within the community developing blockchain related technologies, the spirit for collaboration and openness is very high, and we are aware that if we were to become successful with anything of the stuff that we're working on, our enemies or the people uncomfortable with what we do won't be just record labels or some big corporation. It will be the entire governments of the world. So we better be united in this quest, aware of what we're trying to work on. But at the core, I'm a deep believer that the internet is certainly providing a possibility with these technologies of personal sovereignty that is going to become a very relevant political idea in the 21st century.
Right. So let's talk some about the Net Party. What is the Net Party?
So the Net Party is a political party that started in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, with this simple approach of Trojan candidates, candidates that are committed to always vote in Congress according to what citizens decide in the online platform. and in that sense, is a party that is proposing a different social contract, a social contract based on modern day technology, and taking advantage of that. The party was run for its first election in 2013. It got 1.2% of the votes in the city of Buenos Aires, which is a very good first result for
Not bad.
Yeah, it was great result for us. And because of that, a lot of communities in different places, particularly in Argentina, because politics tends to be within the walled gardens of the nation state, we saw different net parties emerge in different provinces and cities of the country. And it's just citizens that they organize themselves around this simple idea of trying to do representation in a much more dynamic way, and using the same logo, the same concepts, the same aspects of what we're doing. And it's been really interesting to follow and to see how these things emerge, how these things grow, how they aim to run for elections. And it's not easy, but it's certainly a big challenge.
So this show is part of a week of shows about Y Combinator. Y Combinator is a startup accelerator that it invests in the early stages of tech companies. So let's talk about your experience in Y Combinator, because it's somewhat atypical since you are part of a nonprofit. What did you have? What was your product when you got into Y Combinator?
So being a nonprofit and being from outside the US, I think we had a bigger hurdle to jump. But thankfully we were already 2 years. We had 2 years of experience, so we already have our product out there. The GitHub repo. I think we had something around I don't know if 100 forks or something like that by then, and. I think what really caught the imagination of the partners of YC was when we mentioned that we did a political party, that it's not just a technological play, but we took the bold move of also trying to figure out how technology is fed to the traditional political system. And I remember in the interview we mentioned that we showed them that we did even a massive Trojan horse of I don't know, 20 feet tall, and we moved throughout the city with that Trojan horse. And when we showed them the pictures, they said, "You did what? You did a political party? How the hell does that work?" And I think that the reason for that kind of thinking in coming from us was something that really interested the guys of YC.
Interesting. But so what features of your app did you have when you got in?
So the app was, we had a stable beta. We had all the features that you can see today. We were trying we weren't really, it wasn't really much different from what we still have today. And the challenge for us was mainly trying to be able to create a global organization from the US that is able to attract activists and collaborate with people from all over the world. That's something that from Argentina is practically impossible to do. And most of our challenges had to do with that.
How does Y Combinator look at nonprofits? Because I mean, they're a startup accelerator. They're interested in making money. What are they assessing when they look at a nonprofit?
I think they're definitely looking at it in a very different way than most of the Silicon Valley philanthropic organizations actually see it. They are the fact that they supported a political party and a political idea like ours is a very bold move for something like Y Combinator, and they really do seem to be taking risks. Nonprofits are not common. In our batch, we were only 3 nonprofits of 103 companies. So it's not really that they have figured it out in a way to ramp up and scale the nonprofit side of YC. But even though we are a foundation here in California, we took the same approach, the same energy, the same lean startup philosophy of executing and focusing on product, and as if we were a for-profit organization ourselves. So in that sense, YC is all about focusing on the product, forgetting about everything else. During 3 months that are extremely intense, and we took it that way, and we worked that way as if we were a for-profit ourselves.
What kinds of product suggestions did Y Combinator give you?
A lot of knowledgeable advice, like being able to figure out ways of attracting much more leads by looking into who are the council members all over the U.S. rather than just focus. That's not necessarily a product tip, but I remember this kind of advice, like don't just focus on the folks that are around here in Palo Alto, San Francisco, or whatever. Go and search for the web for absolutely every single council member in the U.S. and see how you can reach them in a scalable way and provide them with your technology. That kind of mentality, that kind of way of looking at problems, I think it's a very interesting lesson of the kind of advice you usually see at YC.
Was there anything counterintuitive that you learned at Y Combinator?
Counterintuitive. Um, I tend to suspect that yes, but I might not remember. What I was impressed about YC is that a lot of my fellow batchmates were extremely bold in their projects, like with extraordinary. Some of the projects were aiming to tap into very, very difficult problems, from lowering the costs of sending stuff to space to figuring out better ways to do big data to diagnose cancer. I mean, it's a really humbling environment when you're surrounded by such bold projects, great ideas, a lot of very generous people around, and the fact that you can always reach to the YC partners anytime. It's actually truly a great opportunity, and you just get inspired by being surrounded in an environment like that, and obviously you make great friends as well.
Yeah, speaking of that, everybody that we talked to mentions the value of the YC network. What were the strong relationships that you developed, and how have they helped you out, beyond Y Combinator?
Well, I still I am in touch with a lot of my fellow YC batchmates. The fact that this very simple thing that pretty much everyone knows what deal they got at the beginning, this 120K for 7% of the company, the YC model, really sets anyone at the same level, and it's very open within the network to share information about how you're going, if you're doing a VC round, or if you are going through some challenges regarding all the different aspects that usually happen in startups, and the community is very open, very straightforward to help each other out. Especially for us as a nonprofit, we had a lot of support from our fellow batchmates, because we are the ones that are not doing these things for greedy reasons. So I think it's an extremely supportive community. And another aspect of it is the brand value of YC has grown to become very strong. And to us, it opened us a lot of doors in the civic tech space, even in New York or in Philadelphia, in Washington, as well as here in San Francisco. The fact that each time that we name dropped that we were at Y Combinator really helped to push the conversation in our favor, whether we were talking to a council member, or we were talking to a potential donor.
Were there any other nonprofits that have gone through YC whose path you were able to learn from?
There was one called Watsi. The founder of Watsi, Chase Adam, excellent guy. When we were right after YC, we focused on fundraising, and Chase gave us excellent advice on how to pursue that process, how from the uh, pre- preparing yourself for 3 months of countless meetings and uh, uh, fighting the fear of asking for money to a potential donor. The tiny things that help you gain the necessary strength to go through that process that can be extremely stressful at a certain moments. And WATSI is a great nonprofit. And in our batch we had the Detroit Water Project that was helping people in Detroit get access to water services, and Serum, which is a marketplace for used medicine. It's great to exchange notes because we are all facing similar challenges.
So at Y Combinator Demo Day, every company has a graph with a metric that they're focusing on throughout the accelerator. What was the metric that you were focused on?
In our case was the official institutions that have implemented democracy, the official governments, or governments at all scales, local, federal, or state level, that were using DemocracyOS, and we try to show our impact regarding to that metric, not so much as to revenue generating. What our goal is at the end of the day is to be able to generate civic engagement, and when you get a city of 2 million people or a city of 100,000 people, the fact that officially we have institutions that are able to get these people, give them the right to participate in their bill making process or in the decision making process of the laws of the community. That was the metric we cared about. But I don't know. I'm not sure if it was the best growth metric because it's our space is particularly strange because it's not for profit, but it's also politics. And in politics, usually the one metric that reigns is votes. And for the voting aspect, it's not so much DemocracyOS as a technology, but the political party within Argentina. And obviously, we cannot do a political party abroad. That's why maybe now we're actually figuring out if we can do a political party as a service that runs entirely online and focus on metrics regarding that using blockchain transactions. But I don't know. We're just thinking.
Interesting. Well, can you talk more about that? What do you mean by that?
So we know that that if we want to pursue this idea of organizations that govern themselves using digital means and digital technologies, and we want to give these kinds of organizations recognition from society. At the end of the day, these are political ideas that are not written in paper theory, but rather are political ideas that are being programmed. And when we did the Net Party in Buenos Aires, we kind of took an approach of a hybrid model where we do a software, a typical open source software, and a political party, a typical political party with people inside in it, and the usual challenges that political organizations face. And after 3 years of doing that, some of the insights or some of the lessons that we learned is that at the beginning, a political party might want to be can be a novelty within the political environment of your country or of your society, but sooner or later, the political environment of your society or your country will enter that political party, and the traditional tactics that you usually see in political spaces are bound to happen, and that can end up making some of these spaces extremely competitive and have two sides, the usual stuff that happens in political organizations. And I think that one thing that is very interesting to me is that if we are claiming the possibility of defining rules of governance online and building institutions online, why not figure out a way of doing a political party 100% online?
How will democracy work in 10 years?
In a decade. How democracy will work in 10 years? I think that I'd certainly like to see that in 10 years from now, we should be able to set up an institution in the same way that we set up a server. And in that sense, I think that this new generation of institutions that do not depend on the intermediation of governments or banks in any, at least in the way we know them today, that run on the internet, assigning tasks or getting funds or taking decisions through different set of technologies mounted on distributed networks like the blockchain or whatever comes next after the blockchain. I think that that is going to assign more and more importance to the political role that the internet is playing in the world right now. And we have some episodes in the last couple of years about that. We have the Arab Spring, we had Edward Snowden, we have Julian Assange, WikiLeaks. All these geopolitical events have to do with the rise of the internet and the rise of a generation that is being educated by the internet. And in 10 years from now, a lot of the millennials out there will be starting to be in their 40s, in their late 30s. And I'm very confident that that generation is able to figure out ways of letting the world govern itself in ways that power is not as concentrated as it is right now, where you have a couple hundred representatives for a couple 100 million people. I think that level of concentration is abusive and is the main reason for so much corruption in so many countries around the world. And a lot of the citizens of good faith that do not want to partake in that kind of power structures will emancipate themselves through some of the technologies that we were talking about today. And I like that idea, that concept of reaching personal sovereignty.
Yes, well, I like that idea too, and I'm a big fan of DemocracyOS. So thank you so much for coming on, Santiago.
Thank you very much for having me, Jeff, that you did. Thanks for that.